How are you today? It's time for your English lesson. Cool? All right. My name is Greg Ruiz, and I work for a company called Appigge. And over the next 45 minutes or so, I'd like to talk to you about the ABCs of APIs. In other words, all about APIs and what you as a startup should know. If you do want to get in touch with me afterwards, I have my cards as well as my email address up there or my Twitter handle as well. Like I said, I come from a company called Appigge, and you've probably never heard of Appigge because even I had not heard of Appigge before I went to work for Appigge. But then I found out that while I might not know Appigge, I definitely knew a lot of our customers because we power a lot of the biggest names and brands around the world, including Telefonica here is also one of our customers. So we have a lot of experience in helping companies with their APIs. We provide an API platform as well as tools to help you create APIs, manage APIs, and all of that. But before we even get into that, all of that kind of stuff, I want to talk to you just about APIs in general and what it means for you as a startup, what's important for you to be thinking about in terms of APIs. Now, I love to start all my presentations with this picture. You can barely see it. It says question everything. This was actually in a subway in Berlin where someone had spray painted that. And I had to stop and take a picture because I love that. And that's sort of the mantra that I have for every time I do development. And that is to question literally everything I'm doing. Because there are no right answers. There's also there are some wrong answers. But mostly, there's no wrong answers, and there's no absolute right answers. We have to be flexible in our development. So let's start with a question. If I was to come up to you and ask you on the street, what is an API? What would you say? Well, first of all, if I came up here to you on the street here and I ask you that, then you would think I'm some lost tourist looking for some place called API, right? But if I was to have this conversation with you somewhere here and say, what is an API? I can guarantee you that I would get a lot of different answers because an API can be many, many different things. It really depends upon your background. So I thought, in order to answer the question, what is an API, I would look it up in the dictionary. So I did. I went and I looked up what is an API. And it said that it is a system of tools and resources in an operating system enabling developers to create software applications. And suddenly I realized that my dictionary was very old. Because it's talking about an operating system. Huh? I don't think in terms of operating systems anymore, right? So while I can't argue with the definition, I mean, they were sort of kind of right in 1980. But today, APIs are very, very different things. So I set out to try to come up with my own idea, my own definition of what an API is. One thing that I would say is an API is a facade. Now, what is a facade? What's the front of something? But it's the front of something that's not real, right? How many of you have been to like Disney World or Disneyland or someplace like that? All those buildings, they're not real. And when you go by, Las Vegas. I had a friend that worked in one of the big casinos, and he took me to his office. And to get to his office, we had to go through a set of doors, and suddenly all the beautiful side of Las Vegas was gone. And we were walking through old tunnels, and the paint was peeling, and we got back to his office, and it was a crappy little hole. And I said, wow, that's a facade. So that's, first of all, what an API is. It's that wall between me and you and the rest of what's happening behind it. Now, for software, that would mean that a software facade could be something that governs how one application talks to another. Okay, so how can my application talk to yours? An API could govern that. Okay, that I can go with that. It also could be something that exposes part of a program's functionality or even their logic. So maybe I create an API that you can talk to that does things for you, that gives you results back. We'll take something as simple as what I had to do last night. When I arrived at the airport, I needed a taxi. And they said, well, it's going to be this much money. And I said, well, how much is that in dollars, right? So maybe that's something as simple as functionality that would do the currency conversion for me. I could write an API that would do that. Now, it also could be something that allows applications to share data. Okay? Now, when we share data, we can do that in a lot of different ways as well. If you think about on your smartphone, have you ever gone to log into an application and it said, hey, you can log in with Twitter, for example. And so, well, Twitter is now going to share some data with this application. Okay? That is done, once again, through an API. And then finally, I guess the big key point, it can be nothing more than an HTTP or HTTPS endpoint. Now, I say the word endpoint because I like to sound smart. But what is an endpoint really? It's just a web address. And as we're about to see, the mystery of APIs is actually quite simple. But before we get there, in summary, I think that an API simply allows us to expose data or functionality. But for you as a startup, what's even more important is it allows you to share your business assets and have those business assets become reachable by apps. Apps that you're building or apps that other people are building. Okay? Oh, it's too bad. You should really be able to see that picture a little bit better. It's a really cool robot working on a computer. Because really, that's sort of what APIs are. APIs, or applications, I should say. Applications use APIs, like you and I use a website. Think about that. What do you do on a website besides look at pictures or videos of cats, right? Okay. If we were to go to your website today, or my website, and we wanted to find out how to contact the company, what would you do? What would you do? You would look for the link that says contact, right? And you would click on that. Or if you wanted to know what products they were, you would click on products. Or if you wanted to know how to check out of the shopping experience and give them your money, you would look for shopping cart or checkout or something like that, right? You and I, as humans, look at websites and take visual cues from the HTTP endpoint. The link, right? The address. A computer application can do the exact same thing with an API. It simply says, hey, do this when you want this result, or go here when you want this result. That's what an API really is doing. Now, APIs, as we already found out, when I looked it up in the dictionary, I found out that APIs are actually very old. Because APIs, they've been around for a very long time. But the APIs that you and I are talking about, they're pretty new in the greater scheme of things. APIs really had their beginning. The APIs that you and I are going to be talking about the rest of the day had their beginnings all the way back in 1991. How many of you remember 1991? Who was not even born in 1991? A couple of you, right? I was actually there. 1991 existed. I remember it. In 1991, that was when the specification for HTTP was written. In other words, the very first lines of code that would become the internet were written in 1991. Now, it would be a few years later before you could actually do anything with that specification. But in 1992, along came Mosaic, the world's first browser. And you and I began to be able to surf. We didn't call it surfing back then. We didn't even call it the web back then, right? It was the internet. But then, if you think about what happened over the next few years, something happened first very quickly. We found out that the web at the time was a bunch of static HTML pages. In other words, boring, right? Static HTML pages were just, they were boring. Because every time you had to change one, you had to actually go manually write HTML and then re-upload the file. Well, suddenly there was a guy in 1994 who said, wait a second, that's dumb. I think I would like to automate how I update my site. So he created something, I don't know, have you ever heard of this? Have you ever heard of PHP? So PHP was actually invented in 1994. Oh my God, it's old. Do you know what it stands for? Personal Home Page. It was originally a CGI script that was written to help this guy keep his own website updated. It was all just text. So it was still sort of boring and not a lot of business use for it at the time. So a few years later, along came something called Cold Fusion. Cold Fusion was the very first application that allowed us to have a web server talk to a database. And suddenly the web got interesting because now I could pull dynamic data. I could pull data about my products out of a database and display it on a website. And that was the beginning of APIs because now we were interfacing. We had a facade. We had this thing between us, the database, and the web server, and they were talking to one another. Now, there was still a problem, of course, because you and I couldn't just talk to somebody else's database, right? That was all still locked away. So a little bit later in 1999, a guy named Dave Weiner came up with something called SOAP. SOAP and XML RPC. And this was a specification that said that attempted to say, hey, if I want to talk to your data and you're not going to let me inside of your building to go hack around on your database, could we agree upon this specification and I could talk to you and you could talk back? Now, there's a funny, well, I think it's funny, a funny saying in English. The nice thing about standards is there's so many of them. And it's true. And SOAP is a very great example of that. Because you, as the designer, were able to say, well, this is the way I want my soap to work. And I could say, well, I want mine to work differently. And so we were far away from that great utopia of being able to talk to one another. So in 2000, a guy was writing his dissertation for the university, and he came up with something that would eventually be called REST, and what we would call the RESTful APIs. And this was in 2000, right? And what it basically said was, hey, SOAP, go away. We don't need you because we've already got a protocol that we can use. It's called HTTP. It's been very successful. The web is actually working quite well based on HTTP. So why not be able to expose data via HTTP? And thus was born the API transition and migration to APIs. Over the next 10 years, it exploded. And now today, this is sadly the newest chart I could find. Today, there's literally tens, if not hundreds of thousands of APIs out there that companies are providing. So, the neat thing is, and it's so sad you can't see that, I worked really hard in the game of civilization to get the screen to be just like that so I could show you that really this is all about technology creating technology. You know, in civilization in the game, you can't create pottery until you've created the wheel. I don't know why, but that's the rules of that game. But this is sort of how the world of the API has gone. Now, for you and I as a startup, when we sit down to build our great application, our great new company, our great new idea, we're faced with a question. That is, to build or not to build. In other words, do we go off and build our own APIs, or do we use someone else's? And I guess it really is back to that wheel thing, right? Does your idea, is it a new wheel? If so, that's great. If not, you may want to use some wheels that somebody else has already built to get your company further down the road, okay? It's a big question. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with using somebody else's work. That's why they've exposed those APIs. So I say, should you build or not build? The answer is yes. In other words, do both. Absolutely do both. Let's talk about your own API. If you're going to build your own API, it's important to build that because, number one, it can incredibly speed up your development. Instead of having to write a whole bunch of code over and over and over again, you can use APIs within your own development team. You hire somebody new to work on your project. They don't have to learn a whole bunch of what makes the API work. They just need to learn, hey, when you're trying to calculate the final price for the shopping cart, just call this API. It does the work for you. Whoa, okay. So that's internal. It can help me out. And it also can help you out externally, even by having someone external using your API, helping you find bugs. Oh my God. Yes, mistakes can happen. Or suggest new features. Things that, hey, wait a second, I'd really like it if your API gave me the option to do this. That can help you with your own internal APIs. And finally, I want you to remember your API, or your APIs, plural, they are the most important piece of your business's intellectual property. Absolutely 100%. Because I've got some bad news for you. You're sitting down, that's good. Here's the bad news. I was in a startup. I found out something. Some startups, they just start. They never do the up part. And hey, that's okay. So wouldn't you rather make sure that your business could succeed on two fronts? Maybe your app is fabulous and it takes off and woohoo. But maybe it doesn't. But somebody looks at the intellectual property that you've created, those APIs, and says, hey, I want to use those in my stuff. So you're providing a dual path to success by opening up your own business intellectual property through APIs. Now, again, you can use other people's APIs too. That's not bad either. Like I said, don't reinvent the wheel. Why should you go and code it up yourself if it's already been done for you? Number two, you can offload heavy tasks. The stuff, when you go to your developer and you go, we need to do this, and they go, ooh. That usually translates to, that's hard, and I'm not going to like doing that. And there's a lot of hard stuff that we have to do in our business. Things like authorization or OAuth. That's hard. It's ugly. It's yucky. Nobody likes to do it. So use somebody else's. Facebook, for example, Twitter, they have some wonderful OAuth APIs. Let them authorize the user. Why not, right? And finally, by using other people's APIs, your app gets better because they're adding features and functionality to their APIs too, and therefore exposing new things that your app could do in the process. So it's a win-win situation for us all. So, talking about using third-party APIs a little bit. There are a lot of places to go to find APIs. That's sort of the big challenge, I guess, or the big question is, okay, where can I find APIs? What APIs are available to me? Well, you can go to a couple different places. One place is the programmable web. At the programmable web, they have a directory of APIs there. Currently listing, this was from yesterday, so it's over 11,500 open APIs out there. So before you go build it, go do a search. It might already be built, right? And there's a bunch of other ones. There's a little one that I found called, there's an API for that. Really, that's the name of it. The site is, whoops, where'd it go? Come back. There it is. APIforthat.com. It's a little one. But I put it up there because I thought, damn, I should have bought that URL. And of course, on my own site, on appigge.com, we also have a dashboard to help you not only find APIs, but to play with them right there. So you can actually work with the API and even know what code you need to write. Would you like to see that for just a second? Yeah? Can we take just a minute? All right, I'm going to have to sit down to do that, though. So here we go. I'm going to bail out of my presentation for a second. And over here on our dashboard, we have this thing called API consoles. And when you go into the API consoles, if I'm on the web, that is, because if I'm not on the web, this is going to not be good. Come on. Well, we're waiting for the web. Resolving host. Come on. We're still resolving host. Everybody get off the web for just a second. This is the problem with trying to do live demos in an environment like this with 10,000 devices online. All right, well, we'll hope that comes back. I'll bail out of this for now. Oh, you couldn't even see me working. Wait a second. Why didn't you tell me you couldn't see it? Okay, well, it's still waiting to do the connection, so we'll move on, and I'll hope that my web connection comes back. All right, so you'll have a chance to see that if my web connection comes back. Now, the neat thing about that is, by going and looking at some of these resources, not only, again, can you see exactly what's available, but also how to work with the API, so you already know what code you need to write. Did I say write? I mean copy and paste. Right into your own code and you're off and running, right? Okay. And just to prove a point, how many of you use Yelp? Use Yelp? No? Is it an American thing? Must be a little bit, okay. Well, Yelp is one of the biggest things in the US as far as I travel all the time. And when I get to the hotel at night, I want to know, hey, what restaurants around me? What food is good? What do people like? Is there a bar near me? You know, all those kind of important decisions that I have to make, like where am I going to drink beer, right? Yelp helps me with that. Yelp is one of the most popular apps out there. And they follow my advice. Truly, they are a mashup. They are a mashup of technologies. When you go to log in, you can fill out the form to, you know, give them your name and your email address and all of that. Or you could just click the big old blue Facebook button. Say, log me in with Facebook and I'm done, right? How much easier is that than you having to write all the authorization code? Now, once you get into their app, they're doing things like listing out restaurants and all of that. That's their business intelligence, right? That's that information, that intellectual property that I was talking about that they're building through their users that are rating things and checking in at the restaurant and taking pictures of the food and all the things that help you and I make decisions on where we want to eat, right? That's theirs. But guess what? They have an API. So in a minute, I'm going to do a demo for you a little bit, and I'm going to show you some data that I pulled straight from their API, okay? So instead of me having to populate a database, I just said, hey, I'll go out and let somebody else populate my database. Boom, there you go, all right? And then finally, oh, and it's so faded out, I'm so sad. Finally, once you get in there, you want to know where's the restaurant? Well, guess what? They could have written their own mapping algorithms. Sure. But they didn't. They said Google's already done a great job of that. So they use the Google Maps API. The Google Maps API provides not only the map, but driving directions, walking directions to the particular place. Imagine how hard that would be for you and I to do on our own, right? So they don't do it, all right? So it's okay. But now, of course, you and I want to build our own APIs. We want to expose our own data. So let's talk about a couple of the things that you need to think about in building your own API, right? The first thing, oh, it's, again, so sad. Can you guys see it better out there? All my nice, light, fashionable gray is just faded out. Oh, well. Your API, I like this slide only because it really illustrates that your API sits in between your business intelligence, your databases, all of that information that's going on behind the scenes, and all of those things that can consume it. Your apps, your website, other people's apps, points of sale, all of the different kinds of things that you can provide your API and your information to. But there's some things to bear in mind when building your API. This is important. I love this. Great design, and now this is actually not really talking about APIs. It's just talking about design in general, but I love it. Great design is all the work you don't ask people who use your product to do. In other words, if you designed it right, they don't have to think. That's really what it boils down to. Don't make me think. Now, in an API, how can you not make me think? Well, there's actually some guidelines I'm going to give you in just a few minutes. The other thing to remember is, I love this, the Cult of Done Manifesto. In other words, I have some news for you. It's never done. It's never finished. Your API will never be finished. Because it's always going to grow. And it's going to continue to get new features. Take features away, change features. Things are always going to continue to evolve. How many of you actually code yourself? Programmers, coders yourself? Okay. Have you ever been in that situation where okay, I'm almost done. And then a bug happens? And then it's like, are you done yet? Oh, well, I'm almost done. Well, when do you think you'll be done? I'm not real sure. But I thought you said you were done. Well, I was almost done. Okay. You're never going to be done. So, number one rule, as you begin to build your APIs, get a small bit of the API done, finished, and put it out there. Start using it yourself. Start using it yourself. Use the API. Let somebody else use the API because, by the way, you and I, we're too close to our own work. When we build our own APIs, we don't see the faults and the errors and the possible misconceptions with the API. Let somebody else use it because they will find your bugs faster than you will. Remember, you're never going to be done. And this is my favorite quote of all time. If you dig a hole and it's in the wrong place, digging it deeper isn't going to help. Isn't that cool? One of my colleagues says, right, move the hole. Okay, if you're digging it in the wrong place, move the hole. All right? In other words, if you find yourself coming up against the proverbial brick wall, something you're having a hard time getting past, you've probably done it wrong. And instead of keeping trying to get past it, start over. It's okay. It's okay to start over and rethink things and do them right the first time or the next time. Okay, so we're going to build an API. We're going to build some APIs around, I'm not a cat person, so I'm a dog person. So we're going to build the API of dogs. Just to illustrate the thought process of going through, okay, I'm building an API. What does that mean? All right, so if I was building an API for dogs, there's the first thing that I have to do, oh, and there's my nice gray again. You have to start thinking about all the things that you need with a dog when you get a dog. Well, first thing, you go to get a dog. Part of the API. I got it. Let's call it get dog. Cool. Now I have the dog. Now I have to get food, get leash, take dog on walk, feed dog, clean up dogs, you know what, right? All those things that you have to do with a dog. All those things are part of the API. But the problem is, as we begin to just think about those things, guess what happens? It sort of morphs. And we start finding out things that we didn't actually plan on. And oh, my nice gray is all wiped out. But there's all sorts of things. Take the dog to the dog park. Teach the dog to sit. Teach the dog to roll over. Teach the dog not to bite my wife's hand. All those kind of things, right? That just sort of morphs and you don't think about. And I call this reluctant API design. In other words, we just started building the API as you and I were talking about it. We didn't sit down and plan. And if you don't plan your API, then it's going to begin to morph. And what's going to happen is, at the end of the day, and oh, it's so sad, you're going to have APIs. This is actually a real world API, and you can't really see it as well as I'd like you to, but there are things like callback. That's a call in the API. Callback. Callback what? Callback who? Callback when? Callback why? I don't know. Looking at this API, there's one called do void. Another one called mass payment. Somebody's getting paid. Who? I don't know. This API is stupid. And it's one of the biggest online payment processing companies in the world. We won't We won't name them, but they might be a friend of yours. Did you get it? This was their version 1. Now they have gone back and done a new version. Thank God. Right? Because they realized themselves nobody could keep up with this. So let's talk about how you really design an API properly. Now, we have a rule in RESTful API design. And that rule is that you should begin, the very first thing should be your collections. So your data groupings, right? If we're talking about dogs, that could just be /dogs. I don't have to say get dogs because it's understood that I'm getting the collection. Okay? The next thing after that, if I wanted an individual dog, would be its ID or its resource. So we call it collections and resources. Okay? The resource is always the second thing. So I have /dogs to get my dogs, and then /dogs /1234, that's the ID of a particular dog. Now, what if you need more things than that? Well, first of all, happily make whatever collections you need, right? Here's some real world ones. Foursquare does check-ins, Groupon does deals, Zappos does product. Now, this one I have a problem with. Product, singular. I would expect to get one product back looking at their API, right? So we say plurals are always better. Design your API, your collections of data as a plural, so that I, as a developer looking at it, know automatically when I say dogs, I'm getting all of the dogs. When I say products, I'm getting all of the products, right? Now, of course, when you start thinking about this, it's easy to think of dogs, but really we could have said animals, right? Dogs are animals. Dogs could be things too, right? So you gotta balance a fine line between too precise and not precise enough, right? So like beagles, like our dog that we saw the picture of, that would be a dumb name because then it's implying only beagles. Well, how do I get the rest of dogs? Oh, I have to use dogs to get that. All right, well then how do I use /dogs and then get beagles? We'll talk about that in just a second. So as concrete as you can get, but without getting all the way down into the very, very low level as you begin to design. Now, I say 3's company. There's some arguments in the community about this. Some say 4's company. I like 3, okay? I don't like to go any further in my APIs than 3 levels deep, okay? Why? Because if I go beyond that, it becomes harder for you and I as the developer to remember what was the path to get to this data. It's a memorization exercise, just like that stupid one that we saw before, callback and do void. You have to memorize what that does and when to use it, right? So I say if you find yourself going more than 3 levels down, dig a new hole, right? So, and by dig a new hole, I mean sweep everything else under the rug. Put it behind the question mark. It's a better place for it. Now the question mark, of course, we've all seen the question mark in URLs. That's for parameters. So if I wanted a dog that was just a beagle, I could say /dogs breed equals beagles. Then I know I'm getting all dogs whose breed is beagles. Great. Hey, guess what? I will bet you tomorrow if I came up to you and said, hey, how would you find beagles? You could remember, oh, it was /dogs breed equals beagles. But if it was /dogs breeds /beagles then you would go, oh, wait, I don't remember. Was it dogs / or breeds / or what? And it becomes that memorization exercise, right? Also provide your developers with an ability to not return the entire record. Can you imagine if I said, give me all dogs, everything that we know about dogs in the entire world, how much data I might get back? What if I'm not interested in that? provide your developers with a chance to use that question mark to bring back only the things that they want. Hey, I only want the dog's name and its owner, and its color, or its favorite food, or whatever, instead of the entire record. Okay? And finally, how are you going to provide all this to them? Well, remember, what was the idea that Fielding had with REST? What was the idea behind REST? We said it was HTTP. Why use anything but HTTP? Well, guess what? There now are your CRUD interactions, your create, read, update, delete. The interactions that you typically talk to a database with, we're now going to do them in HTTP. So if we wanted to say, create a dog, I am God, I can create dogs. I would say post/dogs, and then provide the data. Name equals owl, color equals brown, whatever, right? That's how I'm going to create the dog. If I want to update the dog, I want to change its name, put/dogs/the dog's ID, and then the data. Name equals Rover. If I want to retrieve the dog, just getting Rover back, get/dogs/1234. Yippee-yi-yay. I've got it. The last one we won't talk about, because that's mean. We don't delete dogs. We pet dogs. We cuddle dogs. We don't delete them. But if we had to, it would just be delete/dogs and then whatever dog we wanted, right? So that is how we began to build that API. Now, last question. Once you've built an API, are you done? No, we know you're never done. APIs continue to grow. You're going to continue to expose additional functionality. And when you do that, you're going to have to make a decision. How do you add or change that functionality? Obviously, you're going to version. You're going to keep a version out there in the wild, the old version. Why? Because if you don't, then my app just broke and it's your fault. Because I was using your old API. So always remember, keep both versions. I say both. You may keep 3. You may keep 4. Depends on how popular your APIs are. Twitter had 3 running at one time. And they were gradually trying to wean people off of the old ones, right? Now, I would not recommend doing what they did for the oldest of the oldest. They just shut it down. So there were some apps out there in the world that broke. But they looked at it and said, we gave you a year. You ignored us, so we don't care, right? And they're Twitter, so they can do that. Okay. But we want to keep at least 1 or 2 versions up there, at least 1 to 2 old versions, and at least for 6 or 12 months. Give your developers time to get updated, right? Now, Now the last thing is, how do you tell those developers what version they're working on? There's a lot of different ways to do it. I'm not a fan of some of these. For example, Twilio uses a date. I am not a fan of that, because a date? Really? I don't remember what day of, which day am I supposed to be working with? That makes no sense to me. Salesforce puts their version all the way down in the URL, the 3rd place down in the URL. It says version 30.0. Well, number one, that already implied to me something. The .0 says, boy, you guys iterate a lot, right? I'm expecting a 30.1 and a 30.2, right? But I have a bigger problem because it's further down in the URL. So it makes it harder for me to remember, A, where is that version supposed to come? Facebook moves it to the front, says version 2.0. I like that. But again, I'm not a fan of the .0, so I actually like Foursquare. Foursquare's got it at the very front. It's /v2/ and now we start talking. They've got just major numbers, no dots. So I can remember that. Okay? So with that, It's time to put it all together. How much time do I have? How much time do I have left? Five minutes. Okay, do you think I could build an API in 5 minutes? Let's try copy paste, exactly. I will do some copy and paste, but I'm going to show you. I'm going to do something scary. I'm going to live code in front of you. All right, here we go. It's demo time. All right. Now this time, you're going to remind me that you can't see the screen, right? Okay, so let's see. Is it pink? All right, you guys can see it now. Woo! Okay, here we go. We are going to do, so I have a database right here. This is a MySQL database, all right? This has some data in it. This is some data of restaurants. All right, now, I've also got my code editor. Now, can you guys see that okay? Can you see that okay? Or I'm wondering if maybe because of the darkness, maybe try this. Nope, that's worse. Okay, I'll go back. All right, so here's what we're going to do. I am going to build an API for you right now, and I'm going to do it using Node.js, all right? So I've got a Node.js server running right now. How many of you have ever worked with Node or have heard of Node? Okay, all right. So just to show you what this looks like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to hold this between my legs and I'm going to type a little bit. All right, all I've done is just tell my Node server that when we see the URL called /hello, that it's supposed to write hello Mexico back in the browser. Okay, very, very simple. So let me go ahead and start my server. So my server is running, and if all has gone well, I should be able to go over here and say /hello, and no. Hold on. The dangers of, oh, it helps if I actually pass in the right thing. There we go. All right, now let's hope that it has worked. See, dangers of live. Oh, helps if I do the right thing. There we go. All right. So let's restart the server. And wouldn't you know it, why am I not getting? Trying to go so fast. Hold on. I did have it all, I had it all working so well yesterday. Well, it doesn't really matter because I'm about to do something else for you. Let me just go ahead and I'm going to fire up my other server because I'm running out of time. So here we go. I'm going to fire up the demo server. All right. It's now fired up. Now, I want to show you a couple of things. First, I'm going to make sure that it is in fact running. And for some reason, I'm going out to the web, and I don't know why. Okay, that's good. All right. So, I'm going to do a /restaurants, and I've actually called out and gotten back some results. These are the results from that database right there. Now, how did that actually happen? Let's go over and take a look at that. And here's the important part of the code. And this is the API part. You see, I've said I want to get /restaurants. Now, when I get /restaurants, that's that definition for the API that I just said. I could call this /anything. In fact, let's do that. Let's call this /Mexico. I'll save this, and when I restart my server, and I call instead to Mexico, then I'm going to get the exact same results back. Because this is what we're actually doing here, is we're just mapping your API. That's exactly what is happening. It is saying /this, remember /dogs? Go get all of the dogs. So in this particular bit of the code, it's just simply using MySQL to do actually a SQL lookup or a SQL statement here to say, go get all the things from the restaurant. Now, that's a very, very simple or very simplistic API. What if I wanted to know something about an individual restaurant, right? Remember how we said in our API we have / for the collection, / and then the ID. Now, I'm going to pull up an ID here. I'm going to say /restaurants. And then I'm going to say /5. And we'll wait for it to connect to the internet. I don't know why it's trying to do that, but once this happens, hopefully, we're going to get a result back that is just going to be that one restaurant and the information that we know about that restaurant. But, come on. Yep, my server's still working. For some reason, oh, I'm offline. There we go. The Wi-Fi is down, apparently, which is causing it a little bit of difficulty. Oh, there we go. Now, hopefully, it'll come. Ah, whoa, what just happened? That was weird. You didn't expect that, did you? You expected some JSON stuff to come back. You see, this is what I wanted to prove to you, that an API can be a mashup. It can be a mashup of all sorts of data. So, what just happened when I did that /restaurants and ID lookup? Well, the first thing was we went to the database and said, hey, let's grab that result. So who is at ID number 5? So we went and found ID number 5. But then I said, well, wait a second. Remember how I told you at the very outset, you can mash things up with other people's APIs for even cooler stuff, right? So what I did was I said, hey, if I know where you are, then I could show it to you on a map. How would I do that? The Google Maps API, right? And if I knew exactly where you were as well, I might be able to use a weather API to look up what are the conditions. Is it okay to sit outside at that restaurant right now? Oh yes, it's sunny. Or no, it's raining. Is it cold? Do I need to take a jacket, or is it hot, right? So what I did was to say, all right, let's look up that query. When we bring back the results, here's what we're going to do. We're going to send off another request. We're going to send off another request to Weather Underground. And we're going to pass in the latitude and the longitude that we just picked up from the record in the database. Because every time I insert something into the database, here's my post. Every time I put something in the database, I actually go off to the Google Maps API, look up the address, so I can give it whatever address I want, and Google will look it up and find the actual latitude and longitude for me of that particular place. So I can store that in my database. So now anytime I call it back out, I can then pass that latitude and longitude to other things. In this particular case, the Weather Underground API. And then finally, once that comes back, I'm actually going to pass that to the Google Maps API again to create a static map with that latitude and that longitude, zoomed in at a certain level, put a little blue marker right where the thing is at that address, city, and state, and then tell us what the temperature is and the current observation for the weather. So I just use somebody else's API to other people's API, right? Now I have a public API. Believe me, I actually do. Let's see if I'm online again. If I'm online, we shall see. I don't know if I'm online. But what you're looking at here is the code running actually up on my own, up on the Appigge gateway. So I've actually taken that Node app and I've packaged it up. And I'm running it on the gateway. By the way, for developers, the Appigge platform is completely free forever. So you can develop and we'll never charge you, okay? So I built a Node app and I put it on our gateway, which means now I can put policies up there, rate limiting, spike limiting, authentication requirements, and all sorts of things. Yep, and I'm not connected, sadly. All sorts of things up there to open up my API. So sadly, that was going to be my last one. I was going to have you all call it up on your own phone. You could have called up that address on your phone right now and hit my open API up there. And I did it literally. I coded all of that in about 5 minutes when I was sitting around at my computer one day, okay? So my friends, that's sort of where we're at in terms of APIs and in terms of what you need to know and how to build them. Lastly, if you would like me to come down and talk to your own company or user groups or whatever, meetup groups or anything like that, then please feel free to get in touch with me. We do these trainings absolutely 100% free. We don't charge you. Just make sure it's worth my while to fly all the way to wherever you're at to do that. We'd love to talk to you. Furthermore, there's a bunch of resources that you won't be able to see because it's all faded out. But if you want, I'll put my email address back up there. If you want the list of resources, please feel free to email me, and I'll send you this slide deck as well, so you've got it to hold on to. All right? With that, thank you very much. I don't know if there's time for questions, but is there time for questions or not? Nope, okay. I'm getting the, nope, you're done, gringo, out of here. Okay, so thank you very much. If you want to talk to me, I will be hanging around and you can ask questions one-on-one, all right? Gracias.